Hello, I am Beck. Welcome to my channel. I hope you had a fantastic new year and are very well rested to watch this D&D character come to life from the roll of a dice. Interesting intro. Anyway, let's bring out the Tower of Destiny! Now, those of you who are familiar with D&D are probably scratching their heads and saying, Beck, what are you doing? A mimic? You can't play as a mimic. Or can you? If the D&D is on board, if the DM is on board, you can play as whatever you want. And I got a little bit bored with my existing table of things to draw last year, so I've updated it. Ta-da! And you'll see that when I rolled a 12, that was a monster in the types of monsters I have categorized as creature monsters, that is ones that don't typically have sentience, and humanoid monsters, so things that you can have a conversation with. Usually they're more of a big bad guy. This one is a creature monster, and I've used the stats from the monster's existing stat sheet instead of rolling new stats. Maybe in future, if I get a creature or a monster or something like that, I'll roll its own stats, but for this one I wanted to keep it kind of close to what we already have. So, whether you're playing it or not, you can always add your own flavor to the creatures and monsters that are in the handbook and the guidebooks and all of those things. So Mimic is a very famous one because it can look like anything. So when I rolled the monsters don't typically have a class. I use the class roll to kind of figure out what sort of monster I wanted to be drawing today. So it was, when I rolled Rogue, is very much like, what is the sneakiest monster that exists? And the sneakiest monster, in my opinion, feel free to debate this in the comments, is a mimic. They are well known for disguising themselves as literally anything. Anything that you can touch could be a mimic. So I decided to go with a little bit of a modern day cliche for a mimic, where in your standard game there tend to be treasure chests, and when you touch them they eat you. Modern day equivalent would be a parcel delivery. So yeah, that's the kind of look that I was going for, and I was kind of glad to have chosen this one because I didn't really draw over the New Year break, so I was feeling a little rusty, and drawing a pile of boxes was like a good way to get back into it. That's some good advice from, if I do say so myself, good advice for artists out there, or really just anyone with a skill that you feel like you haven't practiced in a while. Start back in with the basics. So basic shapes if you're drawing boxes and spheres, and add the details slowly afterwards. You don't have to dive back into detailed poses and things like that. Do some practicing, fun. And of course I'm using a completely nondescript delivery service. It's got a very, classic looking arrow that anyone might use. It's certainly not a recognizable logo, so, don't even worry about it, guy. It did take me a while to decide where I wanted the mimic's actual mouth and face to go, so while we watch me struggle here, I might just talk a little bit about what a mimic is and what it can do. So, according to my favorite source, D&D Beyond, mimics are shape-shifting predators able to take the form of inanimate objects to lure creatures to their doom. In dungeons, these cunning creatures most often take the form of doors and chests, having learned that such forms attract a steady stream of prey. You might have seen on the stat block that I posted earlier that they have certain moves that they can do, These include shapeshifter, so obviously being a polymorph, it can change its form into whatever it wants to change into, and no one's really sure what it looks like in its natural state. I think it's a little bit like a Harry Potter boggart situation where if it's between shapes, it just looks like halfway between each and each, and no one's ever seen it not pretending to be something, so no one really knows what they look like without any sources of inspiration. It also has a sticky tongue. So another move that it has, when it's in object form only, is the mimic adheres to anything it touches. A huge or smaller class-sized creature adhered to the mimic is also grappled by it. They need to make ability checks in order to escape the grapple, and they have disadvantage on that because another trait that the mimic has is grappler. The mimic has advantage on attack rolls against any creature grappled by it. So those who are not familiar with what that means is if you have advantage on something, usually that means you would roll twice and take the higher roll. But if something else, like say the mimic is a grappler, it has advantage on attack rolls. And if you are grappled by something and you've got disadvantage, that just means you roll twice and take the lower roll. So you get it. It sounds complicated when you try to explain it, but when you're actually playing, it's very easy. Don't worry. False appearance is another one of the mimic's special abilities. While the mimic remains motionless, it is indistinguishable. I can say words. It is indistinguishable from an ordinary object. So obviously you wouldn't see the face. Like when people draw them, such as myself, I draw in the face and the tongue so that you know that I'm drawing a mimic, because otherwise I'm literally just drawing a pile of boxes and being like, there's a mimic there. Trust me, one of them's a mimic, or maybe all of them is a mimic. Maybe everything's a mimic. Maybe the door is also a mimic in the background because it's sitting on a doorstep. You get it. You have to demonstrate in the art that it is actually a creature. Otherwise, it's just like, think of a thing. Think of a thing. That thing is a mimic. Well done, you've pictured a mimic. There's a few more, not so much traits, but actions that a mimic can do. Pseudopod is a bludgeoning damage move where it basically uses its tongue or whatever. It's not always its tongue per se, but it looks like its tongue, like tentacle, I guess it could also kind of look like. Kind of hits its prey, but it's also sticky. So if they succeed in hitting, the target is subjected to the adhesive trait. Then also they have the bite action as well. It does say in information about mimics that mimics typically live alone and hunt alone, but will occasionally share their feeding grounds with other creatures. And although most mimics only have predatory intelligence, a rare few evolve greater cunning and the ability to carry on simple conversations in common or undercommon language. Such mimics might allow safe passage through their domains or provide useful information in exchange for food. So this is where a DM might choose to have a mimic that's a door, for example, but instead of it just being the kind of mimic that eats anyone who touches the door handle, it might give you a riddle or set you on some sort of challenge where, like, communicating with a door to be like, I will let you through if you do XYZ, versus just the simple encounter of like, okay, well, now we're fighting this door. And I mean, it can be fun to just go straight into combat, but it's a little bit more fun to have a riddle, or even like having the party decide whether they want to just do what the mimic wants and pass through freely, or hopefully pass through freely, assuming the mimic's not lying, or if they want to try and trick the mimic. Such fun, so much fun. So some of these that I'll be drawing in the upcoming year, I guess, whenever I'm doing monsters and non-playable characters, are more from the perspective of if you were thinking about DMing and looking for ideas like that. However, if you were thinking about playing as a mimic and using a homebrew, some homebrew rules to make a mimic into a playable character, you probably would largely use the stat block as a jumping off point and then compare that to, say, any other race. For example, most races have dark vision. I imagine a mimic would have dark vision since it does say that they will often hang out in caves and dungeons. You wouldn't necessarily want to stack on all these extra abilities that the mimic has as a monster onto an existing race. Like, you wouldn't take all the traits of an elf and attach that to the mimic and then also have all the things for the mimic. You might use one of the races that are a little bit newer and maybe don't have as much information about them. Like, I might probably look at like an Earth Genasi or a Shapeshifter. That would make more sense, like a Changeling. So there are already playable characters that can change their shape. So you might even prefer to just play one of those. But if you specifically have your heart set on a mimic, maybe look at the racial traits for a shapeshifter or a changeling and see which ones would logically apply to a mimic, and yeah, go from there. Probably a good rule of thumb would be if you're adding one of the mimic traits into this homebrew race, you should take away one of the racial traits that are on whatever the base one that you're working on, just so to keep it even. Although again, that's a conversation to have with your DM, because you probably will have noticed if you've compared different races that some of them have a lot of racial traits and some of them only have like 2 or 3. Some of them have got really powerful racial traits and some of them are just like dark vision, and that's about it. So it really depends on how you want to play it and what your DM thinks is too powerful, not so much for the challenges that they're going to set, but compared to the other players that you're with, because you don't want to be that player who's got the super maxed out powerful homebrew character while everyone else is kind of just following you around watching you kill everything, because that's not fun for anyone except maybe you, but even it will get boring for you after a while as well, trust me. Not that I've done it, but trust me. Whenever I'm DMing, my general rule is that it needs to make sense story-wise. So like, if you have a plausible reason why you want to play as a mimic, or why this mimic has developed a sense of self and sentience and wants to be an adventurer, then I would be happy to have that character in my game. I would also be happy, just kind of looking at this cute little guy, if you were to adapt one of the familiars, which we haven't really talked about familiars. I might go into detail in a different video, but it's basically like a helpful pet. You could have like a small, like a juvenile mimic as your familiar. I think having a full-grown mimic as your familiar would be a little bit too powerful unless you were one of the much higher levels of adventurer, but that could also be a lot of fun. Anyway, yeah, that is my mimic. Here it is. Didn't give it a name, this little guy. I think I might call him Munchie. Munchie the Mimic. Isn't that cute? What do you think of my mimic that I drew, and also my new way of doing stuff? Hopefully you like it, and subscribe and hit the notification bell to be alerted when I do new videos. If not, that's okay too. I'm not for everyone, but thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I'll catch you next time. Okay, bye!